Welcome to LogRocket. I'm Kate, and this is bdougie, Director of Developer Advocacy at GitHub.
Hello. Thank you for
How's it
having me.
going?
I'm doing fantastic. It's well, for context, it's a Thursday, and just sort of chugging along through some content today.
Yeah, right. For context, it is a Thursday. Awesome. So yeah, if you could tell us a little bit about yourself and kind of how you got to GitHub. I know it's probably a long story, so just kind of give us a couple bullets here.
Yeah. I mean, the high level bullets is so I do developer advocacy at GitHub, and I've been here for 3.5 years. And how I got to GitHub is because how a lot of people use GitHub. I use GitHub. I was really interested in GitHub GraphQL API a handful of years ago, and did a conference talk on it, and was invited to speak to GitHub Universe on that same subject. And from doing that talk, I had some conversations, and then, long story short, I was invited to interview and eventually accepted an offer at GitHub to be, at the time, the first developer advocate to kind of don the title. We've always had advocates. The early engineers, all early employees always were advocating for GitHub. But for specifically the developer relations team, I got to join and get to see that team get started.
Yeah, that's great. And I mean, it's really hard to think of developers who aren't familiar with what GitHub is. So, I mean, being a developer advocate at GitHub is certainly an achievement and really exciting for sure.
Yeah. I love the role. I hate to say this all the time, but the job's almost too easy because I don't have to constantly explain what GitHub is and how to use it. I get to talk to users that are already, maybe you did a boot camp, maybe you were in college and were part of a class that had you sign up for GitHub. So that problem solved. So I get to show you cool ways to use GitHub and cool interactions and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's awesome. And so you do a lot of other things. You're also the host of a lot of podcasts, specifically Jamstack Radio, and then also the GitHub, the README project podcast.
Yeah.
So I'm curious about those, and maybe kind of tell me the inspiration for those.
Yeah. And the third podcast I do, and I do too many, This Developing Story was my original podcast I started when I learned how to code. So I was sort of talking about my story of how I learned how to code back in 2013, and eventually turned that into an interview podcast where I interviewed other folks. And I've taken that same sort of model, but instead I now focus on Jamstack companies and community members on Jamstack Radio. And that's what I do. I interview folks that are involved in the sort of JavaScript ecosystem, front-end web dev. And sometimes we get some Kubernetes and Docker folks or back-end heavy folks on there as well. And then finally, the README podcast, which is a podcast to highlight, folks doing really cool things on GitHub. So whether you have a project maintainer or you sort of went from zero to hero to now fully doing open source full time, those are the folks that we reach out to on those podcasts. So reach out if you want to be on any of those.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Yeah, that's all. I was just listening to the README project right before this, and it's really cool to hear about kind of where people where they were in their lives, to get to the project they're working on. And I think it has a really interesting take on what people were thinking and doing to get to the technology that they made, as opposed to just talking about how the technology works. I think that's really cool.
Yeah. And what I learned from just interviewing all those folks, and some folks you've heard of, the creator of Vue, Evan Yu, everyone's story is pretty different. Even if you had a CS background and you got your master's, or maybe just got a regular CS degree, got your job or internship, everyone's story continues to always diverge from different paths. There's no structured path. There's no sort of certification when it comes to web development or even just general engineering. That's what makes the podcast so interesting. And one sec, I'm gonna unplug this thing.
That's all right. Totally. Yeah. So I guess we could talk about podcasts a lot. So I won't ask too many more questions. I guess I'm kind of curious. Kind of what is your process as a host? How do you prep? For all these different podcasts, especially different, stories, like you were saying, what's kind of your process of getting prepared for each one of those interviews?
Yeah. So, I do so many of them. So with This Developing Story, that one's low prep. It's more of I DM friends or DM people I see on Twitter. And the prep is I only ask 3 questions the entire podcast. It's who are you? what do you do and how did you get here? And that's the Dis Developing Story thing. With Jamstack Radio, we actually have we share a paper doc, which is Google's like Google. Dropbox is like similar to Notion. I'm pretty sure both companies don't want to be compared that way. I did an awful job with that. But basically, I send a quick doc, and I've got a couple questions. They've got a sort of release to be able to be on the podcast because we do a lot of editing. And that's actually produced by HeavyBit, which is an accelerator in San Francisco. So a lot of the sort of prep work is all up front, and then I sort of hand it off to editing, and then it gets shipped in like either a month or a couple weeks. And but I try to do very limited like research on the projects and the companies that I talk to, mainly because I want to go on the same journey with the actual listener, who's maybe never heard of like a LogRocket, which y'all have not been on the podcast before, but maybe they haven't heard of LogRocket. So then we go through just the conversation of as a new user myself, going through asking questions and trying to figure out, how would I use this and what use cases and how can I get started quickly. And then finally, the README podcast, like the secret sauce is we have a production team at GitHub, so it makes it easier. So they're reaching out to guests. I do a lot of intros as well because I know a lot of folks in the industry. Reaching out to guests, and then we do similar. We have a doc that we sort of propose questions that sometimes we share with the guests, sometimes we don't. But it's a similar sort of like figuring out, learning the story. And what's interesting about that too, as well, is like we tend to go on paths that aren't expected, because I think a lot of technical podcasts, they talk really deep in the details, and we get technical in the podcast. But I also get to learn about like background history and stories. And I mentioned Evan Yu. Like I didn't know that his first job at Google, before even doing Vue or anything like that, was actually doing the Google Doodles. He was on the team to create those things. And which is cool. Mind blowing. I'm sure he's probably mentioned that before, but I missed that part of the story. Sort of seeing him sort of glow up when it comes to Vue, but also learning that he didn't have a CS background. He had an art background, which is why he started doing the Google Doodles, which is why he started getting really deeper into code, and which is why he figured out a framework to get things shipped faster, which was Vue. So that story is fascinating. And once you get to have all those pieces in like one conversation, I know this is not answering your original question, but I'm just saying the prep work and everything like that. Usually when I'm going into the conversation, I'm thinking of like, what would be the aha moment? Or I think Scott Hanselman told me this. He hosted the Hansel Minute podcast and was like, what's the sort of driveway conversation? So if you're in a car, you listen to a podcast and you get to the driveway of your house and you don't want to get out of the car because you want to finish the podcast, like what would be the thing on the podcast to keep you in the car?
Oh, that's it. I haven't heard that. That's a good tip. As a podcast producer, I should know what that is.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, Evan Yu, I didn't know that either. That's a really cool story. And we have reached out to him to come on this podcast. So Evan, if you're listening, you can follow up this story and we can talk more about it. Great. Okay, so you recently wrote a blog post, kind of 3 areas to focus on as a developer in 2021. Yeah. And you also had a video as well. And I really like one area there, which you coined Dev Talks, so developer TikToks, which I haven't heard that term before, and I love it. And it was kind of, encouraging people to make more videos and just kind of be there in a digital space. I really appreciate that. I think that's really interesting. One, I love TikTok. I love watching TikToks. I also feel like, and this kind of speaks to my earlier point, like a lot of these podcasts, we're kind of all talking to each other. And so like, I noticed you just had James Quick on, and then he just had Jessica Chan on, who we just had. And so it just feels like there is a need for more people to like talk about what they're working on. And it definitely is, there's such a great community of influencers and dev advocates already, but there's definitely room for more is what, and I really,
for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's the same thing. Like TikTok's great. Follow me, bdougie on TikTok. But like, it's the same thing when it comes to conferences. Like you'd see at the JavaScript conferences, the Git Nation conferences, you see the same folks that end up showing up every year or every single conference. And it's the same thing when it comes to podcasting, because not everybody wants to be on a podcast. So the folks who are on podcasts tend to get invited to other podcasts. And it's the same thing with open source. The folks who are doing open source get invited to do more open source. But with that being said, what I like about TikTok right now and what's happening is that it's very much a younger demographic, and it's very true when it comes to even technical content. So the majority of the folks that are killing it on TikTok per se are college students, because they understand the audience, they understand the memes, they understand how to correlate that into funny jokes about Java or whatever, or classroom settings and stuff like that. And those are I think the original folks who are doing well on TikTok when it comes to technical content. Now, there are some advocates and other engineers who have now jumped in and are doing really awesome content, which I highly recommend. Find that blog post, which maybe it's in the show notes, and follow everybody I mentioned there. But what I like about it is I'm now engaging a different audience, and it's the audience that I think we're really focused on at GitHub, which GitHub, we don't have a awareness problem. As I mentioned before, the job's kind of easy when it comes to getting people to sign up for GitHub. It's already a done deal. But where we do need help on is getting people to use the next level of GitHub. So the amount of bootcamp students I've talked to who are yeah, I know GitHub, I have an account, but I don't know how to use issues. I didn't know you could open an issue with just any open source project, or I didn't know you could even contribute to any open source project. And there are some sort of rules of interactions with projects, how to contribute is in a contributing an MD. That's something that maybe not everybody knows. So how do we educate the masses, or maybe new developers, on how to use GitHub in the next level way? And I find what I like about TikTok is that that's the audience. These are all the newest developers coming through, graduating college, learning how to code. Maybe then they navigated because one of their YouTube teachers or egghead courses, they followed them. They found that they had a TikTok. Now they're on TikTok, and now they're finding other people. And the virality, TikTok's algorithm is actually, when you think about it, it's actually pretty basic. And it actually lends itself to actually, you could be a nobody, publish your first video and get 10,000 views and then 1,000 followers within a week. And that's what's kind of where everybody can be famous. That's what's kind of driving why TikTok is so big, so fast.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah. I do like that. It's, your feed can be anybody, like you were saying, and you don't have to be famous to have a famous TikTok video, which I appreciate.
Yeah, and it's there. I think there was an article, actually. I forgot who did this article. Maybe it was BuzzFeed or somebody, but talking about the TikTok algorithm and how it could be problematic because it can start learning what you like. So if you watch a lot of sad TikToks, it'll send you more sad TikToks, which could be a problem.
Yeah.
But it's the same thing. The reason I didn't want to use TikTok for the longest time is because I thought it was all dance videos, just
Right.
teenagers, stay-at-home moms all doing the shuffle. And I'm oh man, I did the shuffle in college. I don't need to see now someone's mom doing the shuffle. But what's cool about the algorithm is that once you stop watching, once you swipe past enough shuffle videos, they stop showing you videos, which now all the content I get on TikTok is technical content. People are talking to me about code and stuff like that, because that's the stuff I like. And I get very, very rarely do I ever see any dance videos anymore, which is quite intriguing.
Yeah, that's interesting. So it's actually pretty sensitive if you can swipe through a couple and then it changes.
Yep. Yeah, so I work on the side project called Open Sauce, and I'm trying to rebuild the TikTok algorithm, but for open source projects. So rather than swiping through videos, you're swiping through projects to contribute to. It's a long process. I'm slowly building this live on Twitch, bdougie on Twitch, and we're actually talking through. Actually, tomorrow we'll be chatting through a bunch of the contributors and myself. We'll be chatting through how to work the algorithm to make it so we're starting to recommend projects to folks.
That's awesome. That's great. And that's a great segue to my next question, which is your project open sourced. And we're actually, we just had Anthony Campolo on not too long ago. He was one of the first people to tweet about us and be like, hey, LogRocket has a podcast. So we're big fans. But yeah, tell us about open source.
Yeah, so it's funny because it's full circle, because you talked about how I got to GitHub. The talk I gave at GitHub Universe was actually about the GraphQL API, and the project I was talking about was open source. So in order to learn how to use the GraphQL API for GitHub, I built a project to basically take notes on contributions I was making for projects. Because a lot of times, like, I think the limitation I have with open source is like, I want to get involved. I don't have time until the weekends. So what I do is I save a lot of issues. I store them in like different docs or spreadsheets. I've done quite a bit different like forms of trying to save notes. And then I ended up just building open source. So then I can just save issues that I can contribute to later, but not jump on them on a Tuesday where I know I can't get to it till Friday. So I'm just going to like put it there, see if anybody comments, and then do some like triage work in silent, like in the background. And then once I've done enough work, then I'll comment on the issue and be like, hey, I did a little bit of triage, found out the error is here. Do you mind if I take this? They say yes. I open a PR and merge it in by Sunday. So like that's my pattern for contributing to open source projects. And so I wanted to recreate that in something that I could share with other folks, which is now open source. And we've since pivoted from just, well, the feature of storing issues in repos, it exists. But we want to now solve the problem of, and I say we because it's a team, a handful of us, just random people on the internet who've joined me in my Discord to talk about this problem. But the focus is now if you don't know where to start, like how do we sort of feed you some stuff to start with?
That's awesome. Yeah. And, we had quite a few guests in the open source space to start out on this podcast. Blitz.js, Redwood.js, and a big problem is, well, not problem, but there is always a need for more contributors. And I think everyone is kind of aware that, it may not be the easiest thing to contribute. So, no, that's really awesome. And I guess kind of along those lines, I guess, how do you picture, like, I guess, open source in general, maybe the future of open source, like, future of contributions, that sort of thing?
Yeah, and I think so I have a vision, but my vision also is relevant for me and people like me. So like same thing with like getting into engineering. It's everybody's got a different path. Whether you need a degree, you don't need a degree, you go to boot camp, it's all different. So open source is all different. And I think where the future is heading is that centralization into thoughts and ideas for how to manage contribution, how to manage the project. Like I think everybody sort of got the idea of do a pull request. That's how you can get review. You can comment in line, whether you use GitHub or GitLab or whatever flavor of Git provider you're using, or SVN, whatever, it doesn't matter. So like we've solved those problems. People know how to communicate. But when it comes to how do you get your project notice, like how do you get your project to get contributions? How do you maintain those contributions and keep people interested? Those are all problems that are being solved right now in real time. And where I see a future is that now we'll have like these sort of recipes. So if I get a project that sort of takes off, I just spent some time on my stream yesterday looking at new open source projects. And there was one for recipes. It was like a sort of fork and then deploy using Docker Compose to like a Heroku or something. And you have a recipe builder. So you can now store your recipes, source from other places, and it's like a community, which is kind of weird because like you got to host your own stuff to make your recipes and stuff like that. But there's enough people who are interested in doing this that they've done this, and it's a nice place to learn how to code and learn Python and Django. So with that being said, I see a lot of those projects now being sort of sanctioned as proper open source projects because it solves a problem. And they've mostly been ignored, but it solves a problem, but it also has an opportunity to like grow community around it. So I see a lot of what Discord is doing right now with open source and inviting open source projects to join Discords and get free Nitro or whatever they call it on Discord. That's changing access and privilege, and like it makes it a lot more approachable for folks to be like, hey, I'm new here. I don't want to take any of your time, but like if you need any help, like let me know where to go, like and start. And I think more and more maintainers are now taking in more folks because everybody's now, like you mentioned, Blitz.js. We actually learned how to code the same way. We both went to the same program called Block. And years later, I'm working at GitHub. He's now has a large open source project. And I guess what I'm getting at is like the folks who are leading open source, the future of open source, are new programmers. So as long as we can sort of educate everybody who's learning today on TikTok, on Twitter or whatever it is, educate them. This is how you can approach open source. Then I think the future open source will be a little more open. And I think there's some of the exciting stuff I can't talk about yet, but with things like we're doing with diversity in open source, and some projects and partnerships with HBCUs, like that's going to help sort of change the sort of culture Because like the one thing I've always kind of rubbed me the wrong way, which when it comes to open source, is like everyone feels like there needs to be, there's like a mantra of like whether it's like the Free Software Foundation, or the Open Source Software Foundation, or whatever foundation, like that's cool. But if I'm just like looking at TikTok and learning how to write JavaScript, like I don't know any of that, and I don't care if free software means a license in this and that and that. If it comes to open source, what I care about is can I use it and can I contribute? Can I be part of the community? And I think if I could summarize everything I just said, the future open source is basically no more gates. Like the removal of gatekeeping. So it doesn't matter where you come from. Everyone has a place to contribute into open source.
Yeah, no, that's great. Yeah, I love that. I actually I was a boot camp grad, and I think even that's been like 5 years ago now, not even, probably 4 years ago, and I think even just from when I graduated that to now, I don't know if it's maybe because I'm like more involved in the community around technology, but I think it's definitely it seems fewer gates, at least from my perspective.
Yeah, and it's pretty fascinating stuff, because I feel like I kind of had my story in the open source was kind of similar to most people. Like I learned GitHub through a boot camp. I didn't know you could open up issues in random projects. So when I found a project that solved a problem specifically that I wanted to solve by Monday, which I was like just doing work on a project on the weekend, I ended up emailing the maintainer. I went on GitHub, found the profile of the maintainer, emailed him, and was like, hey, can you help me? I don't know anything about this Node.js business. And he responded. And today, emailing maintainers, I think is probably going to I wouldn't recommend it. But today, my recommendation is like, read the contributing MD, find out if they have a Discord or a Slack or something similar. Find out if there's like a place you can ask questions. If it's Stack Overflow, because it's a larger project, like go ask a Stack Overflow question, and then take that link and then post it in the Discord. The amount of people that just sort of post this, like a question into like a chat expecting a response, it's pretty high. And I think if you have a link to an issue or a link to a Stack Overflow question, you get a better rate of like a return on your investment, but also the maintainer sees, oh, you're helping out the project by asking your question publicly, where then I can have the answer and then I can link to it in the future. And like making things scale is like one of the best things you could do if you want to be introduced into open source or a project.
Totally. Yeah. So with all of your, content and you're writing blog posts, you're doing podcasts, you have a YouTube channel. I guess like one, I'm kind of curious, like where do you know where to put what? I guess, video, Twitch, TikTok, YouTube, I guess, where do you know kind of where to put all your stuff?
That's a good question. It's funny because I have a newsletter that I was going to be writing about that actually thought, because I didn't know, like TikTok, I didn't know what to do with it. Like I had like one meme video I did with my daughter. I've since made that private, and then I switched to tech content. But then like the tech content, what I notice is like if I'm just like on there and say, hey, you ever heard of GitHub? Did you know you could do this on GitHub? Here, point and click here. Like that content kind of doesn't do very well on TikTok. Folks that it does well, if you already have a bigger following, like you can sneak those in and people will be okay with it. But TikTok is more about culture and memes. And those are the things that are going to be more viral. So if you're asking a question, actually Shimmy, she's on TikTok, and I first found her on TikTok because she was making a lot of jokes around the questions she gets asked at conferences. And she would like wear a Patagonia vest and some like aviator glasses and pretend like she was a tech bro. And I thought it was hilarious because it's like, oh yeah, I understand this culture. I understand the joke here. And whether it's for you or it isn't, like, I guess what I'm getting at is that she's making jokes about developer culture and community. And it's in a fun way on TikTok. And that's what kind of grows audience and a brand. I think MongoDB is doing a great job on that on TikTok, and as well as Shopify. They both have TikTok accounts. But as far as like YouTube, Twitter, what I've done is I've tried to essentially not basically create these different channels where I think things will work. So because conferences were shut down for shortly now, we got remote conferences and now some in person at this point. Like the very first conference I did in the pandemic, they asked, hey, can you create a video and then edit yourself and then give it to us and we'll upload it? And I'm like, oh, wow, I don't even know where to start. Like, how do I get the camera and my screen recorded at the same time? What do I use? So I learned all this stuff in a year. Like basically from that one conference that I did very awfully, I was like, okay, I need to learn how to edit video. How am I going to do that? I'm going to make YouTube videos every week. And then I'm going to learn how to edit while making these random YouTube videos. So to answer your question, like I tend to do like more culture and conversation on YouTube. For GitHub's YouTube, I tend to do a lot more like technical tutorials and like quick interviews like this interview, but I'll do it with the PM and we'll do it in video format. So like think of podcast, but video. That's what I kind of do a lot of on the GitHub YouTube channel. On Twitter, it's just a free for all. It's whatever. It's culture. it's content. It's links to newsletters. But I guess to clearly answer the question, like I kind of have figured out the channels where technical content will go on YouTube, and then fun stuff will go on TikTok. But for the most part, it's always changing. So like it's gonna, if you ask me again in 3 months, I'd be like, oh, you know what? I figured out this is the only type of content that's working on YouTube. Which when I first started doing YouTube, it was only conference talk style videos, but in a YouTube form. And what I found that gets the best engagement is hands down technical content. So if you can do series based content of like, here are three videos of how to set up XYZ, or 2 videos or 1 video, like that's going to do the best. It gets the most click through. It gets most engagement. It gets the most follow through. And my internal like pitch for us doing YouTube content was recipe content. So like when I go make cookies, like the first thing I do is I go to Google and I learn how to do the recipe. And what happens is I always go back to that same recipe because it worked. So when it comes to technical content, people go back to the same technical content over and over again. So what we see is the return viewers and users, they'll come back because they want to find out like 2 minutes in, Brian said this. So I'm going to go back and watch that video and then get unstuck. So I guess that sort of answers the question. But again, it's good. You ask me again in 2 months, it'll change.
Yeah. Yeah. And you actually talk about that on Jamstack podcast, the how a lot of developer advocates had to return to their YouTube channels. And there was, I think you used the term conference talk graveyard, which is great. And then it's like, with COVID, it was like, okay, so now we have to revisit video content. And and LogRocket certainly was not immune to that. So
yeah, it's crazy because it kind of like showed how much we leaned on conferences when it came to like developer relations. Because I could go to a conference a month and my job is done. Like I'll have lots of engagement. If I get one keynote like a quarter or even twice a year, then like I pretty much we're good to go. That keynote's gonna be seen. People are there. We network, make community, have connections. So then it's now turned into, now we're moving the conference graveyard and now we're sort of cleaning up and weeding the garden. And actually now this sort of content garden now of people can sort of come and go, which is now intriguing. And I got some pushback on Reddit when I posted this on the developer relations Reddit, which was, I don't think conferences will be the same. I don't think we'll have as much investment as we did prior to the pandemic. Because now if you ask me to go sponsor your conference or someone else's conference, and they're like, hey, we can get your email in front of 20,000 of our Twitter followers. And I'm like, oh, that's cool. But GitHub has 2 million Twitter followers. So like, what are we really asking for here? You're not selling me on anything. And if the question's like, oh, we'll get it in front of our 10,000 subscribers on YouTube. Well, GitHub has 200,000. Like it's not a flex really, but it's more of like, okay, what are we doing here? Like, I don't think GitHub will sponsor conferences for good reason. Like we still are, but we're sponsoring less. And so now when it comes to conferences, like what is the selling point? Like how, and this is for all you conference organizers, what happens to the video once the talk is done? Like, how are you promoting it after the fact? Because if you say we're going to have a email campaign, we're going to create blog post, we're going to have you on the podcast after your conference talk so people can go watch the conference talk, and we're going to continue to point people to that until the next conference, then I'm sold. Okay, cool. Sign us up for 10K. We'll be there. But a lot of conferences aren't doing that. A lot of conferences is like, hey, we'll tweet you. And then GitHub can retweet that. And then GitHub gets better engagement on our Twitter account than maybe these conference organizers. So With that being said, I think we have to now think about the difference and the different approaches.
Sure. Yeah. And you're like, hey, now I really like to edit videos. So I'm just kidding.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing too, as well. Is like we're partnering with Hacktoberfest. So all the content I'm doing for Hacktoberfest, it's going to live on GitHub's YouTube. Because we were already, I joke, I say feeding two birds with one scone. We're doing that. We're going to get YouTube content on GitHub. We're going to teach people how to get involved in Hacktoberfest, and then everybody wins. And there's no reason for us to, like, we are partnering and sponsoring and stuff like that, but there's no reason for us to, like, shell out millions of dollars on these different engagements when GitHub could very easily do the same thing. But I think what the biggest thing about my team at GitHub and what we've done is we try to scale everything. So how can we scale these interactions, these engagements, without feeling like it's a whole production just to get one thing shipped?
Sure. Yeah, totally. Oh yeah, I completely agree. And then, okay, so kind of along with these lines, so when I was researching you, you have a lot of your brand is kind of pizza oriented, and I think that's probably from open sauce. But I guess I think you've done a really good job, like with your personal brand. And was that intentional, or kind of tell me about that?
Oh, thanks for noticing. No, it is intentional, because like even before we hit record on this podcast, you asked, do you go by Brian? Do you go by bdougie? And I usually default to with bdougie, but I give people the out if they're like, it feels uncomfortable to say bdougie, or sometimes if you have a different dialect or accent, Dougie doesn't really roll off the tongue. So feel free to call me Brian. But I intentionally do that because Brian Douglas, if you Google Brian Douglas, you'll find me, because I've done a good job of like cornering the SEO market and juice for Brian Douglas. But if you Google bdougie, you find me pretty quickly, because I am the one bdougie that's doing anything. Now, there is a bdougie on Twitter. So if this goes out on Twitter, please don't at bdougie, at bdougieyo instead. But the amount of people who follow him because of just what I do is actually pretty hilarious. I should actually interview him and see. He's a dad who plays Xbox, so which is in his bio. So, but it's like a tongue-in-cheek thing we've had for years, because people can't at mentioning him. But for the pizza thing, and even different, like I call myself a Beyonce advocate. Like that's something that I started doing as soon as I joined GitHub. And it was because the Brian Douglas thing, it's kind of forgettable, two first names. So I always introduce myself as a Beyonce advocate, because you're going to remember the guy who mentions Beyonce. The amount of times that people call me Beyonce or send me Beyonce songs in my DMs and stuff like that, and then tell me happy birthday for Beyonce a couple days ago. Like that's a thing that I just sort of started doing, because when I gave that first conference talk in 2018, when I mentioned Beyonce for the first time, I happened to be listening to a lot of Beyonce. And I never grew up, I didn't listen to a lot of Beyonce growing up or in college or anything like that. And I found out that Beyonce is actually a pretty four-dimensional person. Like she has a lot of thought in her writing and the dancing and her life. And once I started learning more about Beyonce, I was really fascinated. And the thing I do, I mentioned Beyonce advocate because at GitHub, we've got 65 million users worldwide. Beyonce has a lot of listeners worldwide, more than that. So with that known, Beyonce does a lot of good will for the community. She actually brings a lot of people up. She's from Houston, so good old Nas X is from there. She's not collaborating with her, but Megan Thee Stallion, who's also from Houston, she collaborated with there. She brings a lot of other people up, like Chloe X Halle, who's the Little Mermaid, Chloe, the new Little Mermaid. Basically, what I'm getting at is I'm always looking to bring other people up. I'm okay to not have 100,000 Twitter followers if I can bring up the next bdougie. So for my brand, I want to make sure that I'm memorable. People know what I'm about and what I'm getting at when you see a conference talk from me. I want to make sure that you're closing. My joke was actually close your laptops. If I get you to close your laptops when I'm on stage, then I know I'm doing something right. Now you got to keep your laptop open because everything's remote. But I guess the thing is if people they connect with me because I make pizza jokes, or in my Discord channel I send pictures of pizza in our pizza channel. People connect through that because maybe you don't listen to the same music as me, or maybe you don't have the same degree or background. But for the most part, everybody loves pizza. So we can all centralize on that. If you don't love pizza, I don't know if we could be friends.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I didn't know the Beyonce thing, but that's great. Yeah, and I love Beyonce. I love pizza, so I definitely noticed the branding there, and it worked on me. So
Yeah, it's just something that that I put a lot of thought into when I first started doing DevRel at my previous employer, Netlify. I was a big Kanye fan. Kanye just released an album, and everybody's got like their own quorums with Kanye and whether they like him or they love him. He's gone through different iterations of his career, and what I realized early on, because like I'm as gangster as it comes when it comes to the suburbs, because that's where I grew up. But when it comes to hip hop music and even Kanye, it's mostly an act. And like if you watch a lot of the Keep Up with the Kardashians, you can see how normal he is in the background. And it's kind of similar to professional wrestling. So going back to the brand thing, to notice like you kind of have to have your gimmick. Otherwise, you're not going to get on the title card. You're not going to get up the ladder of being able to get promoted and being, in all the commercials and having little action figures for you. So professional wrestling, I hate to spoil it for you, but it's not real. But it's the one reason why professional wrestlers like The Rock and John Cena can be great actors. It's because they're already acting. And the same reason for like hip hop artists like Ice Cube and LL Cool J can be great actors. It's because they're already acting. So when it comes to DevRel, I can act like a 100% Beyonce stan, which I'm going to pull back the curtain a bit. I don't actually listen to a ton of Beyonce. I'm not a huge fan, but I love her music, and I will promote her as much as I can because I think what she's about is real. I also don't eat a lot of pizza. During the pandemic, I was eating pizza probably once a week because of I guess mental reasons. But yeah, I didn't have pizza last week, and I actually had pizza the week before. But that's besides the point.
Do you have a favorite pizza?
I'm actually really, really vibing with Detroit style pizza. Now, it's pizza that I know as a kid, Little Caesars, before they went the $5 hot and ready, they used to make a Detroit style pizza, and I loved it, and I never had it since. And then I was watching Jason Langstar stream, and for some reason, he started diverging into pizza and talking about Detroit pizza. And I was like, wow, that was great. So there's a local shop in Oakland called Pie Guys, and they make Detroit style pizza, which, if everybody's wondering, it's basically a focaccia style bread with the oil bread, basically super thick. They put it into a square pan, and then they put the cheese on top. So then, since it's a square pan, kind of like a brownie pan, or I don't know, I don't know how your listeners are US based or whatnot, but everybody Google brownies or Google Detroit pizza. It gives you like a crispy side cheese crust, and it's absolutely amazing.
Awesome. Well, bdougie, is there anything you'd want to share with our listeners, have them to go check out, or
Yeah, I mean, for sharing purposes, I'd say like open source. I would definitely encourage you to try it out. If you haven't contributed something, open an issue, like report bugs. Like if you're using something, a lot of times people just like they find a bug and they work around it. Like reporting that is always the best thing you do for a maintainer. And then as far as like things to promote, follow me on TikTok, bdougie. I swear it's good stuff. It's usually funny. If it's not funny, it's because, well, it's because it's too inside. I share my TikToks with my wife, and she's just kind of like, I guess this is funny, but I don't get it because it's like super developer humor. So check it out. I promise you'll at least laugh at one of them.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us. And yeah, we'll include all those in the show notes. And yeah, thanks, bdougie. We'll see you around.
Yeah. See ya.